hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Margaret came up to me on Thursday, Margaret Sherman, and said, I really like the way you have the titles for the sermon and the bulletin. And I have a little confession to make, which is that I always give a working title to Judy on Monday, and the thing I have not figured out yet is that Judy prints the bulletin on Wednesday morning, early on Wednesday morning. So I'm afraid the title for the sermon that you have in the bulletin doesn't bear much resemblance to the current sermon. It begins with a story about Gordon. Gordon was 79 when he died, 17 months ago. Hundreds of friends and family members came to his funeral. Gordon was loved by hundreds, perhaps by thousands of people. In some ways, Gordon didn't look like someone who had faced great challenges. It would have been easy to think that life had always been straightforward, to think that Gordon had never suffered great pain. But Gordon was one of these who had come through the great ordeal of life. Gordon wasn't perfect. Just like the rest of us, Gordon made plenty of mistakes. Gordon had a temper. He was impatient, especially when he was driving. He often had a few choice words for drivers who showed no regard for others. Sometimes Gordon felt depressed about himself or about the world. Gordon wasn't perfect, but Gordon did his best. You could tell that life wasn't always easy on the outside, and life was almost never easy on the inside. Gordon was one of these who had come through the great ordeal. Gordon was a working man. He never quit working. He just loved being with God's people. Gordon had some pretty tough jobs. The kind of job where you come home exhausted after a long day and you can't sleep because things at work just aren't right. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Gordon had some tough jobs, and there were many times when life wasn't what you would call fair. Like the time when Gordon was fired because the guy who worked in the office next to him was messing up. Gordon was one of those who had come through the great ordeal of life. Gordon was a pastor to God's people. Gordon was a great preacher. Gordon was always helping others. I am pretty sure Gordon never turned his back on anyone who was in trouble. Gordon never turned his back on anyone who was suffering, in part because he had also suffered. Gordon was abused by an ordained pastor when he was a teenager. Gordon understood that those called to lead God's people as ordained ministers can do a great deal of good and can do a great deal of harm to those who put their trust in him. Gordon was one of these who had come through the great ordeal of life. Gordon worked for justice. He helped lead the struggle for equality and civil rights. He worked to establish tutoring programs for children, literacy programs for adults, and he helped people register to vote. Gordon watched as one of his closest friends was killed as they protested the construction of a school intended to segregate the children of their city. He watched the news of the Reverend Martin Luther King leading marches for voting rights in Selma, Alabama, and saw the terrible photos of dozens of men and women who had been brutally attacked by state troopers and members of the Ku Klux Klan. Just a few days after his 30th birthday, Gordon took a notes to Selma. He was scared as they prepared for the march, but he followed Reverend King across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, keeping his spirits up by talking with a boy from a nearby farm who walked next to him. Gordon was one of these who had come through the great ordeal of life. Gordon was my father. As a boy and then as a man, Gordon taught me many of the things I needed to learn about life. Like all of the best teachers, Gordon taught mostly with his actions, but also spoke some powerful words to me and to others. As has happened or will happen for many of us, Gordon spent his share of time as a patient in the hospital. Gordon had breast cancer for 14 years. He suffered from many side effects and complications of his treatment and his disease. During the last few months of his life, he hardly ate at all. During the last week of his life, he refused to drink. Gordon was one of these who had come through the great ordeal of life. This is our reality. It is hard for some of us to accept this reality. No matter how successful we may be, no matter how hard we work, no matter what we do to try to protect ourselves, protect our friends, or protect our families from danger, sickness, violence, or hardship, each one of us will spend some part of our lives struggling to make our way through the great ordeal. This idea is quite hostile to many of the ideas I hold dear. The idea that our lives are a journey through the great ordeal of life is unsettling to me. It disturbs my idea that I would get to choose. This is especially true for me as a man, as a white person, and as a straight person from a privileged background. I have had many, many choices in life. There have been a few difficult times in my life, like when I took a job working with the toughest people in the toughest part of town. But most of the time, including that time, I had a choice. It has taken more than a few decades, but a few years ago, my overwhelming faith in the idea of personal choice finally crumbled away. I began to understand something that some of you have known for most of your lives. We are making our way through the great ordeal of life. The idea that life is a great ordeal is hostile to many of the other ideas that surround us. It is hostile to the idea of the power of the free market. It is hostile to the idea of the power of democracy. It is hostile to the idea of progress. The idea of progress is not just for people who consider themselves to be politically or socially progressive. America is founded on the idea of progress. And almost everything we do in this nation is based on this idea of progress. Liberals like the idea of progress because they like the idea that their goals of equality of opportunity and societal support for all persons will succeed in the end. Conservatives like the idea of progress because they like the idea that their goals of adherence to moral principles and their understanding of the power of discipline and self-reliance will succeed in the end. The idea of progress is deeply opposed to the idea that we are making our way through the great ordeal of life. This idea that we are in some sense making our way through a great ordeal is deeply unsettling to me. Perhaps it is unsettling for you as well. This is one of the purposes of the book of Revelation. I believe we have been given this collection of books we call the Bible, not to comfort us, though we may find some comfort there, and not to give us factual information about the past, though sometimes we may find historical information there, but in order to help us understand the truth of our lives and the love we share. This is why we call them holy. The book of Revelation is holy to me. I do not understand it. Many people have spent hundreds of years attempting to understand it. People with brilliant minds have worked at it like a puzzle, assuming that there is some sort of key to unlock its secrets for our complete understanding. Revelation uses fantastic metaphors and symbolic language. But Revelation is not some sort of complicated, coded message for us to solve. Some Christians today think they have cracked the code. Some of us Christians claim to fully understand the meaning of the Revelation of John. Some of us Christians tell others and our children and ourselves that we know exactly what all of the images and metaphors mean for us today. We use it like some sort of instruction booklet to prepare for what we confidently claim will happen next year, or in 10 years, or at the end of our lives. But Revelation is not some sort of instruction booklet. Revelation is not a coded message for our greatest thinkers to decipher. The purpose of Revelation is not to inspire confidence or certainty for those who read it or hear it. The purpose is to unsettle our understanding of life. The purpose of the Revelation of John is to help us learn some of the truth of our lives. The purpose is to open our hearts and our minds, at least enough to recognize that we and those we love and those we find very difficult to love are simply trying to make our way through the great ordeal of life. Next Sunday, we will read again those most important verses from the Gospel of John. In chapter 13, Jesus gives his disciples one new commandment: love one another. Not 1,000 commandments, not 10 commandments, just one commandment. 3 words. 3 words, and yet almost impossible for us to accomplish. It is almost impossible for us to love one another. It is only possible if we have been in some way unsettled. It is only possible after we see each other as